I still remember the moment my phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor, because the message I had just read changed everything. I had come home early that day and found strangers standing in my bedroom, touching my things, whispering like they owned the place. I thought it was a mistake. I thought someone would explain. I was wrong. Because the very next morning, there was a hard knock on my door. Not from my husband. Not from a neighbor, from the police. And as I stood there in my pajamas, heart racing, one thought kept screaming in my head. Who was trying to destroy my life, and how far were they willing to go? My name is Emily Carter, and I was 33 years old when I realized that the people closest to me were quietly rewriting my life without my consent. I lived in a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb outside of Denver, the kind of place where the streets stayed clean and the nights felt safe. The kind of place where you believed nothing truly terrible could happen. I used to think that safety was permanent. I was wrong. From the outside, my life looked settled, married, stable, respectable. I had been married to Ryan Carter for 6 years. People described him as dependable, charming, and responsible. He had a calm voice that made others relax, a smile that felt reassuring, and a way of speaking that made his lies sound like truth. I did not know that at the time. I thought I had chosen well. I thought love meant security. Ryan worked in property development and handled most of our paperwork. Mortgages, permits, contracts, everything that felt complicated. I trusted him because that is what marriage demands. Trust is supposed to be your shield. I did not realize it could also become the knife. I was an interior designer. I loved transforming spaces, bringing warmth into empty rooms, creating homes that told stories. I believed I was building a life with my husband, not unknowingly building evidence against myself. Sometimes I think about how carefully everything was layered, how slowly control was disguised as partnership. It did not happen all at once. It never does. Ryan had always been proud of me in public. He praised my work, told people I was talented, and made me feel admired. But in private, things were different. He started questioning my independence. He said I spent too much time working. He said a wife should prioritize her marriage. His words were gentle, but the message was firm. I did not notice the trap because it was lined with affection. And then there was his mother, Margaret Lewis. She never liked me. Not from the first handshake. Her eyes always felt sharp, as if she were searching for flaws. Her compliments sounded rehearsed, and her criticism was disguised as concern. She commented on my cooking, my clothes, my career, even the way I spoke. She believed no woman would ever be good enough for her son, especially not one who thought for herself. Ryan told me to ignore her. He said she was old-fashioned. He said she meant well, but he never corrected her. He never defended me. He simply watched as she chipped away at my confidence, one sentence at a time. Silence is not neutral. Silence is permission. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered what she said about me when I was not there. That thought lingered longer than it should have. It felt like a warning I did not know how to interpret yet. Our house was under both our names legally, but Ryan handled everything. I trusted him completely. The paperwork, the finances, the communication with contractors, it was all his domain. I did not feel excluded. I felt relieved. That was my mistake. Because when someone insists on handling everything, they are not helping. They are controlling. The first crack appeared on an ordinary afternoon. I came home earlier than expected. Client canceled a meeting, and I decided to surprise Ryan. I stopped at a bakery and picked up his favorite cinnamon rolls. I was smiling when I unlocked the door. That smile disappeared the moment I stepped inside. The house did not sound right. There were voices, deep voices, unfamiliar voices, the scrape of furniture against the floor, the clatter of tools. My heart started pounding before my mind understood what was happening. I walked toward the bedroom and froze. 2 men stood inside. One was holding a toolbox. The other was pulling open my wardrobe drawers. My clothes were scattered across the bed like they were preparing to remove me from my own space. It was like walking into a scene where I was already being erased. I asked who they were. They looked at me like I was the intruder. One of them said, "We are doing renovations." The owner approved everything. The word owner burned into my ears. Owner, not husband. Not us. Owner. I called Ryan immediately. No answer. The workers showed me documents, contracts, permits. His name was printed clearly at the top. Everything looked official. Everything felt wrong. My hands were shaking as I held the papers. That was when fear stopped being abstract and became physical. Because if he had authorized this, what else had he done? That night, Ryan avoided my eyes. Said it was a misunderstanding. He said he forgot to tell me. Said it was for our future. His words came too quickly, like lines memorized in advance. He dismissed my concerns, minimized my fear, and subtly suggested I was being emotional. That was when doubt turned into suspicion. The next morning, the knock came. Firm, authoritative, final. When I opened the door, 2 police officers stood there. They asked for Emily Carter. They asked if I was aware of an investigation involving property fraud and falsified documentation. My legs went weak. The world felt distant, like I was underwater and everything was happening too slowly and too fast at the same time. I realized something in that moment. This was not an accident. This was not confusion. This was a setup. Someone had carefully positioned me where the blame would fall first. Someone had made sure my name was close enough to the fire to burn, but far enough away to deny responsibility. Ryan was no longer just my husband. Margaret was no longer just my difficult mother-in-law. They were becoming my enemies. And as the police stood in my doorway, waiting for answers I did not have, a terrifying truth settled in my chest. This was not chaos. This was strategy. And I was standing at the center of it. If you have ever trusted someone with your whole heart, only to realize they were using that trust against you, then this story is for you. If you have ever felt underestimated, manipulated, or quietly pushed into a corner, stay with me until the end. Because this is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about taking your power back. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. What you are about to hear proves that even the most carefully planned betrayal can be destroyed by the one they thought would never fight back. After the police left, the house did not feel like my home anymore. It felt like a stage where everyone knew their role except me. Ryan moved through the rooms calmly, too calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. He made coffee. He checked his phone. He avoided my eyes. That silence was louder than any argument. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, trying to recognize the man I had married. His shoulders were relaxed. His breathing was steady. There was no panic in him, no fear, no urgency. And that was the first thing that made my stomach twist. If your wife is being questioned by the police, you should look worried. You should look protective. Ryan looked prepared. I asked him what the officers meant by fraud. He sighed like I was exhausting him. He said it was probably a paperwork issue. He said property matters were complicated. He said I should trust him to handle it. That word again? Trust. He used it like a shield, like it was a command instead of something earned. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt suspicious. The creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the vibration of Ryan's phone on the nightstand. I noticed how often he checked his messages, how quickly he turned his screen away from me, how carefully he guarded his space. Something was unfolding, and I was not included in the plan. The next few days were worse. Margaret started calling more often. Her voice was falsely sweet, layered with concern that did not feel genuine. She asked if everything was all right. She asked if I was stressed. She suggested I might be working too much. She hinted that emotional women often misunderstood legal matters. Each word felt like a quiet accusation. She came over 2 days later without warning. She walked into my house like she owned it. She glanced around as if she were inspecting a property she would soon claim. Her eyes paused on the furniture, The walls, the shelves. Not admiration, assessment. She said, "This house has always been too much responsibility for you." I asked her what she meant. She smiled thinly and said she only worried about her son. She said Ryan carried too much on his shoulders. She said maybe it was time for him to take full control of things that required logic and discipline. I understood what she was really saying. I was the problem. I was the liability. Ryan said nothing. He stood beside her, nodding slowly, letting her words settle like dust. That was when I felt the shift. They were no longer hiding their alliance. They were letting me see it. Later that evening, I checked our shared documents, bank statements, property records, contractor payments. Everything Ryan had always handled. I noticed small things at first. Minor withdrawals I did not recognize. Signatures that looked like mine but felt slightly off. Forms that I never remembered signing. My hands started shaking. Because mistakes are random. Patterns are intentional. When I asked Ryan about the finances, his tone changed. Not defensive, calculated. He said I was imagining things. He said stress was affecting my judgment. He said maybe I should take some time off work and rest. His concern sounded compassionate, but his eyes stayed cold. It was subtle, gaslighting, slow, controlled, effective. Margaret began visiting more often. She criticized my cooking. She rearranged my kitchen without asking. She made comments about how Ryan needed peace at home, not tension. She suggested I was becoming unstable. Each visit ended with me feeling smaller, quieter, more uncertain. They were shaping a narrative. And I was being cast as the unstable one. One afternoon, I received a letter from a legal office. My name was printed boldly on the envelope. Inside was a notice regarding property misrepresentation tied to my signature. My heart dropped into my stomach. I read it 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood. I had not. Someone had used my name. Someone had used my trust. When I showed Ryan the letter, he barely reacted. He said lawyers exaggerated everything. He said it would be resolved. He said I should not overthink it. He said I should let him handle it. But something in his voice had changed. There was no reassurance, only authority. That night, I overheard him on the phone. He was speaking quietly in the garage. I did not catch every word, but I heard enough. Deadlines, documents, timing, risk. My name was mentioned once, only once, but it was enough. My skin went cold, 'cause I was not part of the conversation. I was the subject of it. Margaret called later that night. She asked if I was feeling overwhelmed. She said strong women often struggled when things became complicated. She suggested I might need professional help. The way she said it felt rehearsed, as if she was preparing evidence, not offering support. I realized then what they were doing. They were not just controlling the situation, they were controlling the story. If things went wrong, I would be the unstable wife, the confused woman, the emotional problem. Ryan would be the patient husband, the responsible one, the victim. And suddenly I understood why the renovations had started without my knowledge, why the paperwork felt foreign, why the police had come to my door first. They were building a case, not against the house, against me. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one terrifying thought refused to leave my mind. If they had already planned this much, what else were they willing to do to make sure I never stood in their way again? The night everything changed, I was sitting alone in the living room with the lights turned off. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second felt heavier than the last, like it was counting down to something I could not see yet. I'd spent days feeling confused, frightened, and unsure of my own reality. That night, confusion turned into clarity. Not because I suddenly understood everything, but because I finally accepted one truth. They were not going to stop. Ryan and Margaret were not making mistakes. They were not fixing problems. They were not protecting me. They were moving with intention, and I was standing in the way of something they wanted badly. That realization settled into my chest like a cold weight. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing, because once you see the pattern, you stop questioning yourself. I went to our bedroom and opened the drawer where Ryan kept Old documents? My hands were steady for the first time in days. Fear had burned itself out and left behind something sharper. I pulled out folders, contracts, copies of identification, financial statements. I began taking pictures of everything on my phone. Quietly, carefully, page after page. If they were building a case against me, then I would build one for myself. Every photo felt like a small act of rebellion. Every document felt like proof that I was not crazy. That I was not imagining things. That what was happening had shape and structure. Halfway through, I heard footsteps. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I did not stop. I did not hide the papers. I did not panic. Ryan stood in the doorway watching me. His expression was calm, almost curious. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was learning. The silence that followed was thick. He stepped closer and told me I was overreacting. He said I was making things harder than they needed to be. He said stress was changing me. His voice was smooth, controlled, patient. But I saw something new in his eyes, caution for the first time. He was unsure of me. That was when I understood how powerful awareness was. They needed me confused. They needed me doubting myself. The moment I stopped doing that, their control weakened. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried silently, not from fear, from grief. Grief for the woman I had been. The woman who trusted easily. The woman who believed love meant safety. That woman was gone, and she was not coming back. The next morning, Margaret came over without calling. She walked in like usual, carrying her authority like armor. She looked at me carefully, as if measuring how much I knew. She commented on my appearance. She said I looked tired. She said stress did not suit me. I smiled. It was the smallest smile. Polite, controlled. Her eyes narrowed just a little. That smile was not fear. It was decision. I started keeping notes, dates, times, conversations, every comment. Every financial change, every strange interaction. I became observant in a way I had never been before. I listened more than I spoke. I watched their movements, their coordination, their confidence, because confidence reveals patterns. One afternoon, I overheard Ryan talking to a lawyer. Not arguing, confirming, finalizing. The tone in his voice was not defensive. It was strategic. He was not trying to escape a problem. He was managing an outcome. My name came up again, casually like an object. That was when anger replaced hesitation. I was not a problem to be solved. I was a person being erased. That realization ignited something in me that I had never felt before. Not rage, not revenge. Resolve, controlled resolve. I started reaching out quietly. A friend who worked in legal documentation, a former client, who specialized in forensic accounting. I did not accuse anyone. I asked questions. Hypothetical questions. Innocent questions that opened doors. Each answer tightened the knot of certainty in my stomach. This was fraud. This was manipulation. This was premeditated. I stopped confronting them. I stopped reacting emotionally. I became still, observant, cooperative. I played the role they expected, the confused wife, the stressed woman, the emotional liability, because the more they underestimated me, the safer I became. At night, I rehearsed conversations in my head. I imagined outcomes. I planned for scenarios where things went wrong. I built contingency plans. I prepared myself for confrontation, for exposure, for war, and I realized something frightening. I was no longer afraid of what they might do. I was afraid of how calm I had become about stopping them. That was my breaking point. Not tears, not screams, not collapse. Clarity. They thought I was cornered, but corners are dangerous places when the person trapped inside finally decides to fight back. From that moment on, I stopped trying to survive their story. I started writing my own. I did not rush. That was the first rule I gave myself. Rushing was how people made mistakes. And mistakes were what Ryan and Margaret were counting on me to make. So I moved slowly, quietly. With intention every morning, I followed the same routine. Coffee. Breakfast.com conversation. I played the role of the confused, exhausted wife perfectly. I asked Ryan if he had heard back from the lawyers. I nodded when he said things were under control. I thanked him for handling everything. Each word tasted bitter, but it kept him comfortable. And comfort makes people careless. At night, when the house was quiet, I worked. I organized the photos. I created folders by date, contracts, bank statements, emails, signature pages. Everything that had my name on it. Everything that should not have. I printed copies and stored them in a small folder that I hid inside a box of old design magazines. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like proof of my own reality. Some nights, my hands shook. Other nights, they were steady as stone. I began recording conversations, not secretly in the way people imagine. I left my phone on the table during discussions about finances and paperwork. Ryan liked to talk when he thought he was teaching. He liked to explain. He liked to sound superior. And in those explanations, he revealed more than he realized. One evening he said, "You worry too much about names and signatures. These things are flexible in business." Flexible. That single word echoed in my mind like a confession. Margaret was easier. She was arrogant. Believed she was untouchable. When she spoke with certainty. She talked about how women like me were emotional liabilities. She said strong men needed to make strong decisions without interference. I let her talk. I asked questions that sounded naive. "Okay?" She answered proudly. They were not just exposing their plan. They were justifying it. I contacted the forensic accountant quietly. I sent documents without context at first. I asked what patterns looked suspicious. Response was immediate. Concerned, professional, direct. He told me these were not irregularities. These were indicators of deliberate misrepresentation. The word sent a chill through my body, but also relief. Validation is powerful when you have been doubting yourself. Next came the lawyer. Not one Ryan knew. Not one Margaret would ever approve of. A woman, sharp, calm, precise. She listened without interruption. She did not pity me. She did not comfort me, she analyzed. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "They did not just underestimate you. They relied on it." That sentence became my anchor. We planned carefully. No confrontation, no emotional outbursts, no warnings. Everything would happen through documentation, timing, and exposure. Quiet pressure, legal precision. The day we moved, I felt strangely calm. Ryan left for work. Margaret was scheduled to visit in the afternoon. I sent the full package to the authorities before either of them could react. Documents, recordings, financial trails. Expert analysis, every piece labeled, organized, clean. Then I waited. My body felt light and heavy at the same time. My heart beat slowly, too slowly, like it already knew the outcome. The knock came just before sunset. Not for me, for them, too. Officers stood outside when Ryan arrived home. Their posture was firm. Their tone was neutral. The kind of neutrality that carries weight. Margaret arrived minutes later, her confidence dissolving the moment she saw uniforms. The air changed. Ryan tried to speak first. His voice was calm, practiced. The same voice that had controlled our home. But this time, it wavered. Just slightly. Margaret demanded explanations. She demanded respect. She demanded control. No one gave it to her. I stood behind them, silent, watching as their world shifted. The power dynamic reversed in real time. Their shoulders tightened, their breathing changed, her certainty cracked. Ryan turned and looked at me. Really looked, not as a wife, not as an asset, not as a liability, as a threat. And in his eyes, I saw it. Recognition. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply said, "I told you I was learning." The words landed heavier than any scream. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time, her authority failed her. She looked small, uncertain, human. They were separated for questioning. The house felt larger, quieter, lighter, like it had been holding its breath for months and finally exhaled. I went to the kitchen and sat down. My legs trembled. My fingers were cold. My heart was racing now, finally catching up with what had happened. It was done. Not with violence, not with chaos, with truth. And truth, when prepared properly, is devastating. The day the verdict came, I woke up before sunrise. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of birds outside. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Every nerve in my body was alert. This was the day everything changed. Ryan had been acting normal, but I knew the calm was fragile. Margaret had stayed at a friend's house, claiming she had errands, but I knew she would return. She always did. Arrogance makes people predictable. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring at the folder of evidence I had compiled. Months of planning, observation, recording, and documenting. Every step I had taken had led to this moment. Every sleepless night had led to this moment. Every quiet, careful action had led to this moment. And now I waited. The first knock at the door came just as the sun began to spill golden light into the living room. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it to see 2 police officers and a lawyer I had never met. Their expressions were serious, unyielding. Ryan stepped forward, attempting casual confidence. "Emily, what is going on?" he asked, voice tight but smooth. His eyes flickered nervously toward the officers. I did not answer immediately. I stepped aside, letting them in. Margaret appeared, behind him, looking composed on the outside. But I could see at the slight tremor in her hand, the narrowing of her eyes, the tension in her jaw. The lawyer handed the officers a stack of documents. Their eyes scanned them, and then they looked at Ryan, then at Margaret, Mr. Carter. One officer began, "These documents suggest serious discrepancies in financial and property records. We have reason to believe multiple acts of fraud were committed, and they involve both you and Mrs. Lewis." Margaret gasped. Her eyes darted toward Ryan, searching for reassurance. Ryan's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to protest, but the officer continued. "Due to the scope and premeditation evident in these documents, you will both be taken in for questioning immediately. You are not under arrest yet, but this investigation is serious." Ah! Laugh rose in my chest, quiet at first, then louder. It was not cruel. It was relief, pure and sweet. The weight that had sat on me for months was lifting, evaporating in the golden morning light. I could finally breathe. Ryan tried to argue. "This is a mistake. She, Emily Carter." The officer interrupted. "You are the complainant." I nodded, calm, collected. I felt the power in that simple gesture. The culmination of every careful step I had taken. Margaret's face had turned red. Her composure crumbled. She looked smaller, less sure. The self-assured woman who had walked into my house months ago, claiming authority, was gone. Every arrogant word she had spoken had become irrelevant in an instant. Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at me now, not with love, not with charm, not with calm. He looked at me with calculation, hesitation, and fear. "You underestimated me," I said softly. The words felt like fire leaving my chest. Warm, cleansing, unstoppable. "And that was your mistake." The officers gestured for Ryan and Margaret to follow them. I watched them walk down the steps, heads low, confidence shattered. The sound of their shoes against the pavement echoed through the quiet street like a drumbeat, marking victory. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, letting my body sag with exhaustion and relief. The silence that followed was profound. The house felt like it had exhaled after months of holding its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft chirping of birds, the wind brushing against the windows. It all felt surreal. Tears gathered in my eyes, not from pain, but from the release of tension I had carried for months. I let them fall freely, feeling lighter with each one. Relief, triumph, validation, every memory of fear, every night of doubt, every whisper of manipulation, it all led to this moment. I walked through the house slowly, noticing details I had ignored in the stress of survival. The sunlight on the walls, the quiet hum of life continuing. My own hands, steady now, capable. I could touch the furniture, the walls, the spaces they had tried to claim from me, and know that they were mine. All mine. I smiled softly, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the power of the truth finally revealed. Justice had arrived, not with violence, not with chaos, but with precision, patience, and calm resolve. And it was sweeter than I could have imagined. I knew one thing. Clearly in that moment, I had survived. I had fought. I had won. And anyone who had ever doubted me or tried to erase me would remember that victory for the rest of their lives. I sat down by the window, letting the sunlight wash over me, and breathed deeply. This was not just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of freedom. And finally, I felt completely alive. I never expected to feel this level of calm after everything that had happened. For months, my life had been a storm I could not escape. Fear, confusion, anger, they had consumed me, leaving me exhausted, fragile, and unsure of who I was anymore. But now, sitting in my living room with the morning sunlight spilling across the floor, I realized that the storm had passed, and I had survived. Not just survived. I had outmaneuvered them. I had reclaimed my life. Looking back, the lessons were clear. People like Ryan and Margaret thrive on underestimation. They rely on silence, on complacency, on trust. They believe that control over others is a gift they hold by default. But control is never permanent. Power is only as strong as the fear or ignorance it demands. Once fear is replaced with clarity, once ignorance is replaced with observation, the scales shift, slowly, deliberately. Everything you thought was against you can become the very tools you use to reclaim your life. I learned that patience is not weakness, it is power. The quiet hours, the careful notes, the seemingly small, insignificant actions, all of those details added up. Revenge does not need to be loud. Chaos is not a requirement. Precision, planning, and steadfast focus can deliver results far more devastating than confrontation or screaming ever could. There is an artistry to it, a kind of poetic justice that leaves the perpetrators stunned, unable to comprehend how the person they underestimated became the architect of their downfall. I also learned to trust myself again. That trust had been broken by betrayal, by manipulation, by their careful planning to make me doubt every instinct. Rebuilding it took observation, evidence, and most importantly, action. Confidence is not a gift. It is earned in moments like these, moments where you are underestimated, cornered, and expected to fail. Taking control of my life, taking the power back, forced me to confront myself in ways I had never imagined. And I discovered strength I did not know I possessed. Karma, I realized, is not some mystical force. It is cause and effect executed deliberately. Ryan and Margaret had spent years trying to shape reality to their advantage, believing that no one would see through their designs. They had created a series of actions and consequences that, if left unchecked, would have destroyed me. But I observed, I recorded, I planned. I turned their own strategy against them. Their downfall was not random. It was inevitable, carefully orchestrated. And witnessing that inevitability unfold was more satisfying than any fleeting moment of rage could have been. I do not forgive them. I do not excuse what they did. I do not romanticize the pain they caused. Forgiveness is not part of this story. This is a story of survival, of justice, of reclaiming a life that was almost stolen. They lost more than control. They lost the certainty that their actions would go unchallenged. And in losing that, they revealed themselves fully. Human, flawed, vulnerable. Now my life has a new rhythm. I wake up and feel the sunlight without dread. I move through my home and feel ownership over every corner, every object, every decision I make. I have rebuilt boundaries. I have reclaimed my identity. And I am no longer afraid of manipulation or betrayal. I am aware, vigilant, empowered. I know that strength is quiet, deliberate, and focused. I also carry a new sense of clarity about relationships and trust. Not everyone can be trusted, and not everyone deserves access to your life. But those who matter, those who are honest, will see the strength you have built. And when the past threatens to intrude, you are no longer powerless. You are capable of defending yourself, not with anger, but with resolve. Every time I think of Ryan and Margaret, I remember that power shifts, that justice can be orchestrated, and that patience combined with observation is unstoppable. They will remember the consequences of underestimating me for the rest of their lives. And I will remember how it felt to reclaim control, to prove my own strength, and to step into freedom fully aware and fully alive. Life continues, but it continues on my terms now. And every day is a reminder that survival, strategy, and self-respect are stronger than fear, manipulation, and betrayal. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us your own story of standing up to betrayal. Subscribe for more gripping tales that prove that patience, planning, and resolve can turn the tables on anyone who dares to underestimate you.